So we just got ourselves a really cool breakdown of the new patch coming for Path of Exile 2, as well as a big interview. And in this video, I want to truncate all of that down to digestible bite-sized bits of information. In my typical fashion of upfronting the knowledge of my video, though, let me go through some of the high points of the patch that is coming out very soon. We're going to be seeing a huge Atlas Map improvement, tablets that spawn bosses, extra extra maps for the tower maps. Better zoom, faster loading when you jump into the map itself, like the entire map, not just simply the Atlas map, but any of the acts 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm sorry, 1, 2, and 3. Boss frequency will be increased as well. All sorts of really cool stuff, but also some item changes. So you're going to have less terrible mods spawning on your items, buffing up a lot of the uniques so that they're better at lower levels. A lot of higher tier affixes will spawn on higher item level weapon or items in general. And now socketables will be able to be overwritten by another socket. So for example, if I have one rune in an item, I can overwrite that rune with another one if I so wish. Monsters themselves are tuned down as far as their AoE damages, in the sense that they're going to spam you with less AoE, especially if it's from off screen. That was one of the big things that was happening, is a lot of off-screen damage would happen. You wouldn't expect it. It would kill your character and it would piss you off. But they've done a lot of improvements to endgame as well to make it so that it is a lot more enjoyable. Again, a lot more quality of life, a lot of better things that are going to pop up with that. If you're playing on console, you'll be able to subscribe to item filters, so you'll have them in your game if you're playing on console. But some other big things, they're going to be buffing the way that armor works. As a minor stopgap buff to a bigger buff that's coming. We'll be able to see stuff like charm usages. They're fixing some of the other little things in the game, but that's the down and dirty of the patch that is coming. We're going to go into some more details in just this next section. And also there's a big interview. There's so many things to talk about with that interview, but just to kind of highlight some stuff. There's no nerfs coming in this patch, not any big ones. Any nerf that is coming, it's to things that were outright affecting the performance of the game and the server. So nothing that's like, oh, they completely broke this build, you can't use it anymore. It's like this build was admittedly broken and it was causing the server to stutter. So stuff like that. Also, any kind of big economy resets, because people have said, hey, economy is really rough right now, big inflation. They will be doing an economy reset with leagues that will be added to the early access. I'll be talking about that in its relative section. If you do not know what a league is, it's basically like a ladder system where they'll be making a new character, but that will come with a bunch of new content, which would make making a new character fun and exciting, like a new character class or whatever it is. Also, just another quick couple of notes here. They're doing lots of improvements on armor, a ton of improvements to the warrior and mace, because they admit that the warrior and the mace are both in really weird slots, as well as armor. And there's a lot of things that are attached to that make it in a weird place. So we'll go into those sections or go that into its relevant section on the interview. But overall, that's the kind of down and dirty of everything that we'll be covering here in this video. You can jump ahead to any part of the video that interests you the most using the chapters with the timeline in the description. Just simply go ahead and navigate to those if you want to get certain bits of information and what have you. But if that's all you wanted to know, please feel free to shut the video down and get back to enjoying Path of Exile 2. There should be a lot of really cool, fun content coming in the most recent league that they're going to be doing, which in their words is very soon, or as fast as they can get to it. So that'll be a cool thing that will be coming. If you are heading out, though, please don't forget to like, comment, or subscribe, as each one of those things does help me out in a huge way. And don't forget to check me out on Twitch, which you can find the link in my description. I am actually currently streaming right now, but we streamed through this entire interview process, taking notes and everything together. So please go ahead and check that out. But let's get started here on the new patch coming to Path of Exile 2, as well as the massive interview. So the first topic I want to jump in on is the new patch, and I'm going to go through all of the notes that I took. This is recorded from the stream. By the time you probably see this video, it will actually be up on Path of Exile's YouTube, so you can watch it in its entirety right there, and they're going to go through all these things I'm going to talk about. But a big improvement that they focused on first was the Atlas map, making endgame fun and not so much of a slog, because you're not getting access to maybe as many waystones, not as many good items, whatever it is. So the Atlas map has been improved. Boss frequency is going to spawn more often, meaning that you're going to see the little boss icon on the Atlas map a lot more. Also, they're adding a tablet that will allow bosses to spawn when you place that tablet in a tower. So maybe it'll say something like, oh, the next randomly chooses 10 maps within the region, and they'll have bosses on them. Speaking of towers, they're adding 4 new tower maps. So you're not just doing the same tower map over and over and over, and they're going to improve the existing one. So if you remember that portion of Act 2, you slog through the towers until you get to the top of those towers. So now that map set is going to use the top tower set so you can see what you're jumping into. You're not just jumping into a room of death. Also, the map in general is going to be improved across the board, a faster loading whenever you access the map device, or just jumping across any of the other maps across Acts 1, 2, 3, or Acts 1, 2, 3 Cruel. You'll be able to now see the biome when you look at things. So it says like, oh, this is map whatever. You can see that biome, a better zoom in and out so you can see more visibility, an overall improvement to the Atlas map. Now, the Pinnacle content has also been improved here as well. So you'll be able to see a lot better stuff here with the Pinnacle content. So the Citadel spawns closer to the center with visibility within the Fog of War. So now you can see where those Pinnacle bosses are going to be. So maybe you're like, I'm never finding the Citadels to do the Pinnacle bosses. Well, now you can see these beams coming out of the Fog of War, so you'll be able to jump to them. Also, a limit. They've added limited respawns to the bosses themselves, with higher difficulties having lower respawns, but this allows you to actually learn the mechanics versus attempting a boss, dying, and not getting a chance to learn anything. So you'll be able to do 6 respawns on, I believe, just the Arbiter to begin with, but they will be rolling out more, and we'll get into that in the next section. Some big item changes. They'll be buffing a lot of uniques to make lower level uniques more fun and engaging for lower level characters, but also anytime you want to roll a new alt. Less bad mods, meaning that stuff like accuracy rating and a lot of the less desirable mods are going to roll less often, because right now they're rolling way too often as a unintended bug. Also in that note too, higher tier affixes will roll on higher item level uniques, so that you can get better stuff out of all that. And socketables can be overwritten with another socketable, like I said in the intro here. So if I have like a rune of iron, then you can have a rune of stone on top, just overwrite it, whatever it is. So you can have a lot more fun with that. So we'll be able to get that going here with this patch. But also in that same note too, bosses and monsters have been tweaked as well. So they've tuned down the AoE and extreme damage of certain bosses and monsters. So bosses and monsters will not throw as much AoE your way, but also you'll deal with less on off-screen damage. So what's happening right now is there's going to be a monster that does a big amount of AoE damage, but they're off screen. You didn't expect it, and it blows you up and kills you, and it frustrates you. So that should be toned down quite a bit. Their big focus in this patch were all the little things that were annoying players, and less focused on things like balance patching and reducing certain builds, what have you. That is coming in its own patch down the road. Item filters, like I said too, will be you can subscribe to those on the Path of Exile 1 website if you are a console player, and it will now enable you to tap into item filters now, finally, if you are playing on console. Also, now when it comes to armor, they've buffed armor. We don't know to what extent. They just said they've buffed it, and there's more on that in the interview portion of this video. And they've also buffed how armor break works as well. We're going to also see some transparency when it comes to charms, being able to see how the amount of usages that are going on. It'll say like, oh, this has got 1 of 4 have been used, or 3 of 4, whatever, 3 of 4 left, whatever it is. So you can see when they're being used and how many are left. Fixing little things like the NPC's music stuff, just a lot of little quality of life bumps that help things with people experiencing certain things. Now, they did mention one of the big GPU crashes that a lot of people are experiencing, where, hey, the game crashes a lot. That is tied to an NVIDIA bug that NVIDIA has told them has been fixed in the most recent driver update that is yet to be released, but they can't pinpoint what the problem is because it only happens about an hour and a half after you start playing. So they're still trying to figure out what that is. So if you are dealing with a lot of crashes, it is probably linked to that bug, which will be fixed with a driver issue, but they're trying to pinpoint it so they can either fix it beforehand or figure out what's causing it so they can fix it across the board. But that is the most recent patch that is coming. Let's talk about the big interview that they did and answer and take a look at a lot of the questions that were asked to them. Now for this next section, we're going to go through a lot of the questions that were asked, and I'm going to go through the answers. Now I've paraphrased most of both the questions as well as the answers. So some of this might be my own parlance, my own kind of condensing of the situation, but you can see right here, it's all written out. So the first question here was, what are some of the things that you're most excited about in this patch? And the answer here was, these are just some fixes, really. We're more excited about the stuff we haven't talked about in the big economy resetting patch. And we go into this more later. There's a bigger expansion of what this means. But what we'll be experiencing in early access are additional leagues. Now, if you played Path of Exile 1, you know what that term means. If you've played Diablo 2 and 3, you understand the concept of a season or of a ladder. Diablo 4 calls them just strictly seasons. Now, with this, you can still play your old character. It's just a way to reset the economy, but also add content to the game that encourages you to replay the game. Now, you can still play the game as normal if they do any new leagues, but again, it's just a way to get you to play any new classes, any new weapons, any new acts that they add. And that's going to be a big thing with these leagues. They want each league to have a ton of content added in with it to bring people back to the game, much in the same way that it's been for Path of Exile for the last like 10, 15 years, whatever. It came out, what like 2013, 14, whatever it came out. Either way. But if you don't know what a league is, that's how it works. Your character stays as your character stays. You can keep playing your character to infinity, and you won't miss out on any content being added because of the way that's going to be layered, I think, with early access. When the game goes live, that'll be a different situation. So it's going to be, I'm not sure how the early access leagues are going to be, since it's not going to be tied to a league mechanic or a season mechanic. If you're coming from a Diablo series, it's just going to be more content added to the game with an economy reset. The biggest thing there being the economy reset and a balance patch attached to it as well. So that is kind of the big focus on leagues. Question, what did you hope to achieve with the Atlas map changes? Adding map diversity and boss improvements helps people decide how to imbue the maps with tablets from towers. Small maps around, let's put more bosses. Bigger maps, let's increase mob density, etc. Another improvement is that it makes the minimum of map sustain better. So what minimum means is the minimum amount of benefit you're going to get from the map. They wanted it to make it so that the minimum benefit of maps was at a higher level. Whereas too much like this right now, they want it to feel a little bit more like that, and with a little bit of a higher maximum too. Like bring up that minimum so at least you're getting something good out of it. And what map sustain is referring to is how your ability to continuously pull through multiple maps by using more waystones and what have you. This is sometimes called waystone sustain when it pertains strictly to the amount that you're getting and dropping and what have you. So this whole system is geared towards fixing that. If you have not encountered it, then either you're playing the game right, I guess, I don't know, or you're maybe not at that point where you have hit it. So if you don't understand these terms, don't worry about it. If you understand these terms and they are pain points, this should be something that alleviates for you, or at least helps out. What is your opinion of the current state of maps from a layout perspective? Good versus bad maps, the variety, what have you. So basically the gist of the answer here was maps should feel worthwhile from a balance perspective, but we won't get rid of annoying maps because they're annoying. So an example of this would be, if you're a character that wants big wide open spaces, we're not going to get rid of all of the condensed single hallway maps because it doesn't benefit your character, because it might benefit another character. So they want the maps themselves to be more worthwhile, which is going back to the previous question about making that minimum be a better minimum. Hopeful that these changes help balance the less desirable maps with better improvements. Question, boss maps were supposed to be more common. So what is your opinion on the waystone sustain? So basically what prior to this patch, they were finding that it's supposed to be 1 in 4 maps was a boss map, but the way that the maps were shaking out, it wasn't looking like that on the actual Atlas map. So those boss maps were hopefully supposed to give you more waystone sustain. Again, waystone sustain being a term regarding the amount of waystones you're getting that match the amount of map clearing that you're doing. So the answer here is we haven't found out why players are having waystone sustain, so we need to understand why before we change it versus just improving that metric. Either way, oh my God, don't get a dog with long fur. Either way, the coming improvements will make this better with better minimums and maximums, referring to the min and max of the map itself. One issue we found is that maybe we need to gear check you more through the tiers so that it causes friction. Because what they're saying here is essentially you're pushing through the tiers at a superficial rate. Maybe there's a tier or a waystone 8, tier 18 map or whatever that you're crushing, but you maybe aren't really ready for the rest of them. So maybe there's a very specific instance where you're succeeding in it and it's not providing enough friction. There's not enough of a gear check that prevents you from pushing superficially beyond your means. said people are expanding out of their tiers too quickly, and it's causing the death and then the sustain issue. So it's basically a negative feedback loop of you progress beyond a certain point that you shouldn't have progressed through because there's no real gear check in place right now. You're dying and you're using waystones, and it's causing this like spiral for characters where then they just aren't having fun, and they're blaming the waystone sustain or the deaths and what have you. So they're talking more about how, yeah, the sustain issue is linked more to people artificially expanding beyond their means. And what I've noticed too in this whole entire interview process is that these guys play the hell out of their game, right? Grinding gears will never be said not to play their games. But I think that they know their mechanics so well and they play their games so well that I think it's hard for them to put into perspective the way someone would approach this had they not really know how to approach waystones to sustain, or what proper gear they need pushing into the proper rate to clear maps. Because maybe people are approaching maps from too much of a binary standpoint. Well, I beat it, so I'm good. Versus I didn't beat it fast enough, I should not go up in tierage. You know, like I think there's a way that Path of Exile 1 players are playing that is ingrained in the culture of the way that they're supposed to play these games. And there's a lot of new players coming to this series, and I think that they're not aware of that. And we get into that too, because they say there's a problem with the tutorialization of the end game, and it doesn't really prepare people for the end game. It just drops them in, and it doesn't really introduce stuff. And we'll get to that in a bit. But I think they both shake hands with the same issue. And it's one thing too that I've noticed, like I said, they know their game so well that there's no way that they could possibly play the game in a way that is someone new to the game, right? Because even if they try to put themselves in the perspective of that, they're still going to kind of like jump over little tiny hurdles that someone brand new is not going to have done. So that's my stance there. What substantial changes will be coming to expeditions? I can't say much, but it's intended without promise. This was a really weird answer. Basically, Expeditions didn't make a great one-to-one translation from Path of Exile 1, and they have a lot of improvements that they're planned. They threw an answer out because they're like, we can't say much on this, but we acknowledge it and we want to change it. So ignore this, because I was typing out what they were saying and it just became like a word salad. It just seemed like next question, please. So there's that. Why wait adding attempts to the pinnacle bosses? So they added attempts to the Arbiter first, but they're figuring out how to add the attempts to the other bosses. It's coming very soon. It's not something that's like months or weeks down the road. It's something that's coming very, very, very quickly. But they're saying, for example, the video for the patch was made last week, so we wanted to decide how many respawns to each boss, because each boss isn't so linear to get to. Breach, for example, needs a waypoint. So some of them won't come this patch, but they'll come very quickly after. So like, again, Breach, for example, you clear the breach and then you fight the boss. If we allow for a respawn, then it goes all the way in the beginning. So we need to add a waypoint so that you spawn on the waypoint, but then we have to add the code for the waypoint and all this and that and this. So he's like, Arbiter was a quick, easy add, or Ritual is a quick, easy add. These other ones need just a little bit more coding to make them work succinctly. So those respawns will be coming. Our Copper Citadel is the same spawn rate as the others. We simulated it and it seems to be equal. We run a cheat that simulates like 1 billion blocks on the Atlas map, and it all looks equal on our end. So if you have that Copper Citadel question, that is answered for you. Question, less bad mods on items. Basically, what does that mean from the patch notes? Answer, there's an issue with higher tier rares not spawning higher tier affixes. And the most common ones that are spawning that are bad are reduced attributes on items. Reduced requirements for attributes, accuracy rate, mana on kill, health on kill. So they've reduced some of these mods so they're not always so prevalent on your mods, but they'll also be displaying the relative tier levels down the road, so that you can have an understanding like, oh, okay, this is a tier 3 mod. There's this many tiers ahead, or there's just some sort of information for you, the player, to understand how that tier rolls in the scope of the total amount of tiers available to it. So more information is coming on how those bad mods and how you as the player are going to understand that. I am covered in my dog's fur because he's starting to shed, and it's just, oh man, it just got all over me all of a sudden. Moving on. Can we expect more quality of life for consoles, text UI size, etc.? It's funny, they were saying that like one of the big issues that they didn't even realize when they're developing for consoles is that their TV is really close to the couch that they're like testing their console stuff on. So like that's like like a thing that are like, oh man, we made that mistake on our own. So they're going to fix that so that they can help with all that across the board. But we certainly need to do more there, but nothing specific I can announce right now. Another thing that we will be doing for controller and gamepad stuff is the ability to fast swap the UI by swapping your input versus restarting your game. So if you're playing on a PC and you want to swap between using your mouse and keyboard or your controller, it will be a more fluid system. There's just more we can do. So we'll be looking at these things and what we can improve. So it is a big thing that they've planned for consoles, and they have a whole bunch of stuff that they're going to be working on. Nothing in specific was said though, but know that they are very aware of it. Question, what player feedback surprised you the most? Answer, we had a lot of worry about what would end up being broken builds wise, but people ended up breaking stuff so quickly. And they were talking about how, like, and it wasn't even just like, oh, you know, is this thousands, is this millions of DPS broken? Like, they were like, oh, this is like hundreds of millions of DPS broken that's affecting the way the servers are running. So it's like they were so surprised at the speed at which people were breaking things and like the severity to which people were breaking things. It wasn't just simply like, oh yeah, this is a broken build, we can fix this. It was, this is a broken build that's dropping our server FPS to 1. So it's like those things were kind of surprising for them. But they don't want to do any mid-league nerfs, but things need some tuning. Like I was talking about in the opening, we have an understanding now of what a character should look like. So our first actual balance patch will be more in line with how people are playing. Because right now everything's been in a vacuum, right? And now that it's been exposed to a wider audience and having more player feedback and more player data, they can better tune these nerfs to make it so that they have an idea of like how players are playing the game and what kind of damage and expectations they should be pulling from certain top tier builds and certain low tier builds to find a good middle point. That's how I extrapolate that information. Will there be any nerfs in this patch? Answer here, and this is a kind of a two-pronged answer. I added more to this because they said more about how nerfing, the ideology of nerfing is going to work in Path of Exile. So I added to this. This is a little bit more of a disjointed answer. So not necessarily the goal was to improve for this patch things that people were annoyed by or fix things that were just outright broken. The big balance patch, which resets the economy and starts a new league, is when that will be coming. If there are builds that are absolutely bricking instances and impacting the performance of other users, then we need to address those things. But we don't aim to nerf for nerf's sake. Like if your build is breaking the frame rate of the game, then it needs to be addressed. Or if the mechanic isn't working as intended, then those bugs need to be fixed. So one thing that they mentioned, and they're going to get us more information on it, but this was related at a different point in the interview, was the way chaos inoculation works. Well, the way that energy shield works, how bleed needs to do health damage in order to turn bleed on. And so energy shield prevents you from being bled, quote unquote. But that's not working as intended. So invariably, if that's not working as intended, and they're like, maybe this is working as intended and we don't know, maybe it's an internal thing we haven't looked at, so we have to go ask someone first before we make any concrete claims or statements. But if that is true, that bleed should always affix, even if you have an energy shield up, then that is going to drastically change chaos inoculation builds. And that falls into this category of if the mechanic isn't working as intended. So we'll see how some of this falls out and how it kind of susses out in the days and weeks to come. Question, there'll be an economy reset on a regular basis. Answer, yes, there will be new leagues and economy resets. We want to also add things with those leagues to encourage people to replay, not necessarily league specific mechanics, but still. So again, league specific mechanics, if you're playing Diablo, Season of Blood, right, where they added in the blood mechanic and that became a permanent mechanic in the game, that would be a league mechanic. A league would be a season if you want to think of it that way. But in early access, what they're doing here is trying to reset the economy so people can approach the game from different angles to get better testing, all sorts of things. So leagues will happen. They are not going to delete characters. Characters can still be played. Content's going to be added that is not locked. It doesn't seem like. It seems like it's just, hey, we're adding content to the game. We encourage you to jump into a new league so you can redo all this stuff. I'm not really sure how all that's going to suss itself out. But either way, those resets will be happening on a semi-regular basis. And I guess the next question kind of answers that. So we'll go to the next question. Can we expect any information on the cadence of the future content of the game? Because this falls into the leagues. The cadence would match something similar to the league cadence of Path of Exile 1. So we want people to come with those leagues. Whoa, that's a wild statement. We want people to return with those leagues. We want the balance as soon as we can, though. But we need enough content in that patch to make it worth it for people to come back to. We're working to get that second league active as soon as we can. No set date, but it is a priority. My own extrapolation of that is hoping for an end of month, maybe start of February for that league. But that league, they said like we have the balance in mind that we want, but we need the content to match that. So I'm hoping that's the Huntress or the Druid. They said those are one of the first two classes that will be coming to the game. Maybe different expeditions, however it's going to work out, whatever those things are. But this will also include Axe. So let's talk about that. Well, it may possibly include Axe. So what are the plans with Axe 4 through 6? And this was a pretty complicated question for them. It's a very sticky situation. So I'm going to read through this, but talk about it more. It becomes a complicated answer of how it affects current content and the continuity of it, as well as how we implement it. So do we do Axe 1 through 4, then repeat Axe 1 and 2 on Cruel, or Axe 3 and 4 on Cruel? So how do we properly hit this? The issue is that it's also content we can put out for the leagues, so then we're double developing for content's sake. Putting the Axe out makes them a higher priority, but releasing them later maybe helps with presentation. It's just a really complex issue. So they're basically saying, do we put out all 3 at once? Do we trickle them out one at a time? And they're saying too, like by putting it as part of the early access league and launch initiative or content initiative, then it forces us to get them completed faster to then stress test them, do any kind of testing on them, do whatever they need to fine tune them for full launch. So I see what they're saying here, that like it then messes with the continuity of how Cruel works. My opinion, I hate the Cruel Axe 1 through 3. I'm just so sick of going through the campaign. I would love to go through Axe 1 through 6 rather than going 1 to 3 and then 1 to 3 again. I get why they did it. It makes sense. It's not a knock on them, and it makes sense what they're doing here. And again, it makes sense that there is then like a hang up of how does that work for the character's continuity if you're coming to the game for the first time and we have Axe 1 through 4. So what do you do with the Cruel? So I get that. What might be the answer there is you make like a mini Atlas map that is smaller than the actual Atlas map as a tutorialization for the full-fledged Atlas map, so that jumping into the Atlas map is like, okay, you know what to do now. You've already done a mini bullshit Atlas map for 20 levels. It's now time to go. It's now time to play. And maybe rather than having set level waystones, it's one waystone. You'll always get waystones. They're always the same tier, but they level with your level. So if you level up, then it pushes the map level up by 1 automatically, something like that. So that when you go into your Atlas map, you have a baseline to approach it at. I think like something like that, because I think the Atlas map is such a big portion of the end game, and the tutorialization, which I'm about to get to, is so poor. This could be a cool way to do it. And it removes the burden of the Cruel Axe and how that fits in continuity wise. But moving down into here, the state of Magic Find, this is, I don't find a big issue here, but I know this is a big thing. Answer, we don't think anything about it is inherently broken. It's part of the trade off of building gear in certain ways for certain builds. You're offsetting your damage for the Magic Find, basically. You can't fully saturate into unique items unlike Path of Exile 1, so it has a different value in Path of Exile 2 versus the first one. Magic Find does also increase the tiers of currency, and we don't have proper information to make an informed decision yet on how they would change that. Our biggest priority was mapping right now for this patch. Our rarity shouldn't feel like a mandatory stat. So if the community is saying that it does feel like a mandatory stat, we need to investigate why that is the case and see how to address that problem. There were some questions like, we don't have a good answer for you, so we'll tell you the issues and what we need to make it a good answer. But this would be an example of, we don't have enough information. We don't think it's broken, but if the community thinks it's broken, we need to find out, is the mechanic broken, or is there something else that is preventing the community from tapping into the resource that we don't find it to be broken? So we'll see what that looks like in the future. Big question here for Warrior and Mace is in a really not fun state, and mainly because of Mace skills. So they, interestingly enough, they don't think that Warrior has a problem in campaign. They think that Warrior has a problem in the end game. Whereas I found Warrior just to be so lackluster in campaign, and that was the first character I played. I was like, man, this is really feeling super grindy at this point. It doesn't have all the synergies, and that's something they kind of talk about as the other classes do. But it's definitely an end game issue, and we do need to look at why that's the case. There's something about the warrior that they don't scale in the same way that the other classes do, and we need to look at why the other classes scale the way they do before we can really do anything for warrior. Attack speed is a huge thing since it's a multiplicative, and the availability isn't as rife with the warrior as it is for other classes. Mace skills will do a lot more damage if we buff too much, so they can't put too much into them. We are doing a buff to armor, but there's a bigger buff incoming because there's more issues with armor than we're addressing in this patch. And we'll talk about that in the next section here. But Darth Microtransaction said, is it safe to say that the warrior is the worst of everything? Like it's got the worst skill set right now. It's got the worst defense. It's got like the worst passive tree, not synchronization, synergy. Is it safe to say that? And they're like, oh, that's a savaging, but yeah, that's pretty much it. So they have a lot of things that they're like, we think it's an attainable change. We just need to take a look at more stuff. So you can see there's plenty of information on what they're going to approach with it. But when it comes to armor, because it's a big portion of the warrior's shortcoming, right? Right now, armor is being undermined by the current state of how the monsters are doing damage in PoE 2. And it's different than PoE 1. So it's changing the way armor is in this game. So basically the little damage that white monsters do is more than it was in PoE 1. So it's really affecting the way that armor is working. So they're using like a similar equation, but that equation's already fucked. So we are buffing it a little, but there's more coming because there's more than just a simple effectiveness buff. Also, the extra defenses that other defenses get access to is something that armor doesn't have as well. It's also that armor isn't just weak, it's that evasion and energy shield are so strong by comparison. So I would expect some sort of stabilizing across all three defensive mechanics, but with a major buff to the way armor works. And it's not, again, not just simply an effectiveness thing. It's the way that armor is mitigating damage. It's the way that armor is taking damage. All those things are going to be changed in the very near future, starting with the next patch. Question, will we be revisiting charms? Yes, we have some improvements in this patch, but as far as the actual numbers, oops, I don't need an emoji right here. We need to see how the ailments really affect the player and how important are the charms. Right now, ailments aren't properly being registered as slows and the such, and charm slots are another thing we need to improve, but charms right now are underwhelming and we need some love. So charms themselves will be improved. I looked at my time recorded. I'm like, this is a 3-hour recording. I'm like, no, I'm streaming. Question, what are your thoughts towards some underutilized mechanics such as essences and strong boxes on the Atlas map? It comes down to a ton of balancing. They were like pretty like, this is on us. We didn't have enough information on Endgame going into early access launch, so it's really on us to balance it better. There are so many essences that a greater essence isn't as great as we wanted, and strong boxes are so lackluster that it isn't as awesome. So they want to increase the drops of greater essences, and they want to increase strong boxes to actually be better. And I spat everywhere when I said that, and I saw it, and it hurt me. It hurt me. I clean my monitor after this. How do you plan to improve the feel of the end game? So one of the big things, and this kind of goes back to a word I've been saying a bunch of times, was tutorialization, which is a cool word. It's a cool noun form of a noun. But the tutorialization is not really there, and the progression isn't really gradual. So we want to change how the end game progression feels across the waystones so that you know how to properly navigate it. Easing the transition will be a big thing, because right now, like I said, you just drop in. You're like, oh, okay. What's all this? And there's nothing telling you enough kind of like transparency on how the waystones are working, what things are really to work for and work towards. So they want to fix that and have it be a more gradual process for the player. Have them feel like they're stepping into an end game where they feel like they understand stuff a little bit better. So that'll be interesting, because I for one would really appreciate that, because I was like, what's this? So we'll see what that looks like in the future. But knowing that they have that as kind of like a focus is nice. I think again, like removing Cruel and making a mini Atlas map that is a set limited amount of steps, I think would be pretty good. And that you can't fail them, right? Like you always get the experience buff from them as a means to kind of get someone from like, maybe it's commonplace that you get to this point at like level 50 or 55, and they've devised a way that this is going to reliably get you like 65, 67, whatever. I think 67 is when I got to Atlas map. So something like that where it's good, or maybe it hard stops and transitions you to the real Atlas map at 65. Something like that could be pretty cool. I almost died right there. Good Lord. And some rapid fire questions here. Let me just kind of do this. You saw that map stash one. I know you wanted it. Will you allow ascendancy swapping? They're kind of on the fence. One guy doesn't want it. One guy does. And I'm sorry, my brain on the names is all over the place. Matt and someone else. But it's still something that we're talking about. Some people are against it and some people are for it. Personally, I like permanence in games. And I know a lot of people do not like that. I don't like complete permanence though. I like the ability to swap off talents, because talents, I don't like anything that forces me to restart the game. But I do like things that like make me choose wisely in the beginning, right? Like I think you can't have someone swap their character class at max level. World of Warcraft does that, but that's not neither here nor there. I think it's okay to have someone go, well, if you wanted to play a warrior, you should have just started as a warrior. And the ascendancy thing, I get it as from a permanent standpoint. It does lock you in a little bit. And I get understanding too that if you tell everyone about ascendancies at the beginning of the game, it's an info overload. But it's only an info overload for the first time you're playing. After that, you understand the mechanics. So, but I guess too, the point is you don't want to create a barrier of entry so that anyone coming to the game for the first time goes, oh, there's too much information. Fuck this, I don't get it. But I think an answer for the ascendancy swapping, give players a one-time ascendancy swap. That way, you know, hey, I made my very first character. I didn't know what I was doing. Give me a chance to swap things around. Boom. Oh, okay, I'm good. Or give Endgame an ability to earn a currency like you had in Path of Exile 1 that allows a full character reset, and that you can completely reset your passive tree and choose new ascendancies. But if you do a ascendancy swap or you do a character reset, you have to go do your trials again. There has to be some sort of give and take on that, I think, because then it just, there's ways you can abuse that kind of stuff is what they were kind of going into, and they don't want people to abuse those systems. So I understand that. And I know a lot of people want just no player permanence at all. Let me swap everything. I think you have to strike a middle ground. Are the 7th and 8th ascendancies as difficult as intended? And they were saying yes. We wanted them to be difficult to get and to be quite an accomplishment at the same time. And my addition here is there's a lot of player power attached to those last 2 ascendancy points, because you're going to be able to fully branch down another branch. So having those have a good barrier of entry, I think is a legitimate system. You're probably logically going to hit them around like your 80th level, leaving 20 more levels to really kind of appreciate those last 2 ascendancy points. So I'm all for the way that they are right now. Granted, someone rushed me through on my 7th and 8th points, so I guess I'm an asshole, but still my point remains. I think having a proper progression for them and having accomplishment attached to them is a good system. Map stash tab when, we're working on it, and as soon as it's done, it will be out, which should be soon. And they were saying, they were super dismissive about this, like, don't worry, we see the need, we're going to get it out ASAP. Not dismissive in the sense like, oh, no, it's coming. Let's next question. They were definitely like insistent that this was something that's coming very, very, very soon. Terrain obstruction, meaning that whenever you're walking on the map, there's pillars that block you, there's trees that block you, all sorts of stuff. There, he was saying it's a matter of individual reworking and making it better across the board. So there's no one size fits all. It applies to nearly everything. So it's a constant optimization. They basically have to kind of go through the game. Oh, this is one, we got to fix it here because maybe it's not hitting. It's obstructing at this point, but it needs to obstruct less here and there. It's a super fine-tuned little thing with little dials versus just like, oh, everyone's got circle of transparency that does all this. So we'll see how that changes stuff across the board. But that is the entire interview. Those are all the patch notes. If you watch the interview to its entirety, because I jumped out towards the end, I was like, these questions are now way over my head. They were starting to go into questions about minions and such, and a lot more of like the niche questions. So I did jump out. If there's anything big that I missed, go ahead and let it be known in the comment section below. There's a ton of plans that they clearly have for the future of Path of Exile 2. And I'm beyond excited to see what these new classes are going to play like. I cannot wait to play the Templar and the Druid. I just cannot wait. So I'm very, very, very excited to play Path of Exile throughout the rest of the year. But go ahead and let me know in the comment section below. Are you stoked with this interview? Are you stoked with this patch? What are some things that they didn't hit on that you want to see talked about? Or what are some things that they did talk about that you're like, finally, they're addressing it? And I cannot wait to see those improved and added to the game. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching here today. Have a good one and take care.